She noticed a shadow in a wedding photo and solved a 30-year-old mystery. The light was the color of champagne. It spilled through the arched windows of the old manor, catching the fine dust motes dancing in the air and turning them into shimmering constellations. It gilded the crisp white tablecloths, glanced off the silver, and warmed the cream gold icing of the 5-tiered cake that stood like a monument to a future she had meticulously planned. Ela felt the weight of her dress, a heavy, luxurious silk that whispered against her skin with every breath. The scent of 1,000 white roses and lilies was thick, almost cloying, a sweet, suffocating perfume of joy. Her joy. She was 30 years old, she was a bride, and this was, by every conceivable metric, the happiest day of her life. Her groom, Liam, was across the room, his back to her, laughing with his groomsmen. The sound of it, a deep, easy rumble, was the anchor of her new world. Everything was perfect. It was aggressively, flawlessly perfect. She had orchestrated it to be. The string quartet was playing a soft, classical arrangement of a modern love song. The chatter of their guests was a gentle, happy hum. Even the sun had obeyed her wishes, breaking through the morning's clouds at the precise moment she had stepped out of the vintage Rolls-Royce. Perfection, a fortress of it. Her mother, Eleanor, glided towards her, her own dress, a shimmering silver that made her look less like the mother of the bride and more like a visiting queen. Her smile was wide, but it was a familiar smile, a performance piece. It didn't quite reach the cool, assessing blue of her eyes. "Darling, you're glowing," Eleanor said, her voice a smooth, practiced melody. She adjusted a stray curl of Isla's hair, her fingers cool and brief against Isla's temple. "Everyone is simply stunned. Your father is already weeping, of course, pathetic man." She said it with affection, but it was an affection sharpened with a lifetime of gentle condescension. Ella smiled back, a mirror of her mother's practiced grace. "He'd better not be, he has a speech to give." On a long mahogany table near the entrance to the grand ballroom, a collection of framed photographs had been arranged. A visual history of two lives converging. There was Liam as a gap-toothed kid in a football kit, Isla on a pony with a triumphant grin, the two of them on a windswept cliff in Scotland, engaged and breathless. And in the center, a large, ornate silver frame held the oldest photo of them. All it was Isla's christening. She felt a pull towards it, a nostalgic tug. She'd seen the photo 1,000 times. It was a fixture in the upstairs hallway of her parents' home, a relic of a past that felt both intimately hers and strangely distant. Like a story she had read about someone else. She drifted towards the table, the silk of her dress pooling. At her feet, in the photograph, she was a bundle of white lace, a puffy cabbage patch-faced infant held aloft by her beaming father, a younger, fuller version of the man now dabbing his eyes across the room. Her mother stood beside him, impossibly chic even in the feathered shoulder-padded fashion of the early 90s. Her hand rested on her husband's arm, her smile a little tighter, a little more strained than his. Behind them were her godparents, friends of her parents she barely remembered, their faces lit by the camera's flash. They were all crammed into the small living room of their first house, a place they'd left before her memories truly began. It was a happy photo, a portrait of hope and new beginnings. But as she leaned closer, the champagne light of the manor catching the glass of the frame, something snagged in her vision. A flicker at the edge of the composition. A detail she had never, in 30 years of looking, ever seen. Her heart gave a strange, sharp kick. A percussive beat against the delicate lace of her bodice. She squinted. The background of the photo was mostly a cluttered bookshelf and a chintz curtain pulled halfway across a window, but in the sliver of glass visible behind her mother's perfectly coiffed hair, there was something else. A shape, a presence. It wasn't a reflection. Reflections in the flash-bleached glass would be distorted, blown out. This was different. It was a figure, standing outside, looking in. A shadow, not of the light, but of a person. A face, pale and indistinct, but undeniably a face. And two hands, pressed flat against the glass, the fingers splayed as if in desperation or fury. The room tilted. The happy hum of the guests seemed to recede, replaced by a rushing sound in her ears, like the sea. She could feel the blood draining from her face. Her hand, holding a flute of champagne, began to tremble, the liquid sloshing precariously close to the rim. Isla, darling. What is it? Eleanor's voice cut through the fog, sharp with concern. Or something else. Isla couldn't speak. She could only point, her finger shaking. In the window, she finally managed, her voice a dry whisper. Behind you. In the photo, there's someone there. Eleanor followed her gaze, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She leaned in, her silver dress rustling. Isla watched her mother's face, searching it for confirmation, for shared shock. Instead, she saw a shutter come down. A swift, almost imperceptible closing off. Eleanor's eyes scanned the photo, her lips tightening into a thin, bloodless line. Don't be ridiculous, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dismissive hush. It's a trick of the light, a smudge on the lens. She straightened up, forcing a brittle laugh. My goodness, you're as white as your dress. Wedding day nerves, darling, it's to be expected. No, Isla insisted, her own voice gaining a desperate edge. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling with the camera app. She took a picture of the picture, the modern screen capturing the 30-year-old moment. She zoomed in, pinching the image until the pixels started to break apart, but the face was still there, gaunt, hollow-eyed, a woman's face. The hands against the glass were long and slender. Look, she said, thrusting the phone at her mother. It's not a smudge, it's a person. Who is that? Eleanor didn't look at the phone. She looked at Isla, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, the mask of the serene matriarch slipped entirely. Isla saw a flash of pure, cold panic in her mother's eyes. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, replaced by an icy annoyance. Isla, stop this. Now, Eleanor commanded, her voice a venomous whisper. You are making a scene. People are staring. This is your wedding day, for God's sake. Put the phone away and pull yourself together. The injustice of it was a physical blow. It was a shove, a slap. She wasn't being nervous or hysterical. She was seeing something real, something profoundly wrong at the heart of her own origin story. And she was being told to sit down and shut up and smile. A power imbalance she had felt her entire life. The dutiful daughter, the perfect product of a perfect family, was crystallizing in this horrific moment. Her father, Richard, ambled over, his face flushed with champagne and sentiment. Everything all right, my girls? He boomed, his arm wrapping around Isla's shoulders. He was a big man, soft around the middle, with a kindness that often felt like a shield against his wife's sharper edges. Isla's just feeling a little overwhelmed, Eleanor said quickly. Shooting a look at her husband, that was a clear command. Handle this. Dad, Isla said, her voice pleading. She held up the phone. Look at the christening photo, the window. There's a woman outside. Richard peered at the screen, his brow furrowing. He adjusted his glasses, leaning closer. Isla held her breath, praying he would see it, that he would validate the horror that was blooming in her chest. He stared for a long moment. The jovial, boozy haze seemed to clear from his eyes. He looked from the phone to the original photo in its silver frame. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced at his wife, a quick, darting look of shared secret history. And in that glance, Isla's world fractured. Oh, that, he said, with a clumsy attempt at a chuckle. That's just, one of the neighbors. Old Mrs. Higgins. Always a nosy Parker, that one. Probably wanted to see what all the fuss was about. But his hand, the one on her shoulder, was squeezing too tightly. His heartiness was a lie, and it was a clumsy, poorly constructed one. Mrs. Higgins. Illa had heard stories about her. She'd died years ago, but the face in the window was not that of a curious old woman. It was the face of raw, bottomless grief, the face of a ghost. Don't lie to me, Illa whispered, the words tasting like poison. She looked between her parents. At their suddenly united front, their identical, panicked expressions, the fortress of perfection she had built for her wedding day was crumbling. And she saw, with sickening clarity, that it was a fortress she had been living in her whole life. The walls weren't there to keep the world out. They were there to keep her in. "We are not lying," Eleanor snapped, her voice low and furious. "We are trying to stop our daughter from ruining the most expensive day of her life with some paranoid fantasy. Now, Liam is coming over. Smile. You will go and have your first dance, and you will not mention this ridiculous subject again. Do you understand me?" The threat was unmistakable. This was not a request. The injustice was suffocating. They were protecting something. Protecting it from her. The secret was more important than her sanity, more important than the truth, even on her wedding day. Liam appeared at her side, his smile as bright and uncomplicated as the sunshine outside. "Ready, my beautiful wife?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He saw the tension, the pallor of her skin, her parents' rigid postures. "Everything okay?" "Everything is perfect," Eleanor answered for her, her voice once again a smooth, socialite's purr. She gave Isla a gentle push towards her new husband. Liam took her hand. His was warm and strong, a stark contrast to the glacial chill that had seized her body. The string quartet began to play. It was their song, a slow, romantic melody. They had first kissed as Liam led her towards the center of the polished dance floor. Illa looked back over her shoulder. Her father was staring at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. But her mother was watching her, her face a mask of stone. And as Isla was swept into the choreographed steps of her first dance as a married woman, trapped in Liam's loving embrace, her mother mouthed a single silent word across the crowded room. A word that landed with the force of a gunshot. Stop. The camera flashes erupted around them. A constellation of artificial stars, but Illa saw none of it. She was seeing only the face in the window, the ghost at her own christening. Mystery had just clawed its way out of a shallow grave, and it was wearing her mother's face. The perfect day was a perfect lie, and she was dancing on the ruins of it, a smile frozen on her lips, while a silent scream echoed in the hollow space where her past used to be. The music swelled, the guests applauded, and Isla felt the cold, undeniable certainty that her life had not just begun, it had just ended. The shadow in the photograph wasn't just a visitor, it was a witness. And whatever it had seen, her parents had spent 30 years burying it, and now, she had just handed them a shovel. The weight of Liam's hand on her back felt less like an embrace and more like a restraint. He spun her gently, and for a moment, her gaze swept past the photo table again. The silver frame seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Who was she? The question was a physical thing, a shard of ice in her gut. Who was the woman with the face of despair, peering into the manufactured joy of her first days on Earth? Why were her parents so terrified? Of a ghost in a photograph, her mind raced, tumbling through the fog of champagne and shock. Childhood memories, once soft and sepia-toned, now felt sharp and suspect. Vague feelings of unease she'd always dismissed as childish anxiety now seemed like premonitions. The way her mother would flinch at certain names, the sudden silences that would fall in conversations with older relatives, the photo albums with conspicuous gaps, pages carefully torn out. She had always accepted the narrative she was given, a happy, privileged, and blessedly uneventful childhood. Now she saw it for what it was, a heavily redacted document. "You're trembling," Liam murmured in her ear, his lips brushing her skin. "Isla, talk to me. What did your mum say to you?" She wanted to tell him. She wanted to shatter the perfect snow globe of the moment and show him the ugly, twisted scene inside. But the warning in her mother's eyes, the silent, desperate command, had been clear. This was a secret that you did not speak. Not here, not now. To do so would be to detonate a bomb, and she had no idea who would be caught in the blast. "It's nothing," she lied, the words feeling clumsy and foreign in her own mouth. "Just overwhelmed. It's a lot." He accepted it, because he was good, and he loved her, and he had no reason to believe she was capable of such a profound deception on the first day of their forever. He pulled her closer, and she rested. her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes. But she didn't see darkness. She saw the photograph, the pale, gaunt face, the splayed fingers on the glass, a silent scream, trapped in silver nitrate for 3 decades. A witness, a victim, or something else entirely. The quartet played the final lingering notes of their song. The guests erupted into applause, and as Liam kissed her, a long, tender kiss meant to seal their future, Isla knew she was kissing him goodbye. She couldn't step into that future with him, not while her past was a crime scene. The 30-year-old mystery wasn't just solved by noticing a shadow, it was ignited by it, and she was standing at the heart of the explosion. The victim was named Clara. Isla learned this not from her parents, who had erected a wall of smiling, brittle silence for the remainder of the reception, but from a half-empty bottle of scotch, and her father's unlocked study later that night. Liam was asleep in their bridal suite, exhausted and happy, oblivious to the fact that his new wife was creeping through her childhood home like a thief. The wedding guests were gone, the music had faded, and the manor was quiet except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. Each tick a countdown to a confrontation she knew was inevitable. Isla had found a box of old documents in the bottom drawer of her father's desk, tucked beneath tax returns and expired passports. It was a flimsy cardboard box, sealed with yellowed tape. Inside, nestled amongst her own birth certificate and vaccination records, was another set of papers. A life, reduced to pulp and ink. Clara Mayhew, born 1970, died 1994, cause of death. Accidental drowning. The name didn't ring a bell, but the face did. With trembling hands, Illa pulled out a small, creased photograph, stapled to a yellowing newspaper clipping. It was her, the woman from the window. Younger, her face fuller, but the same haunted, dark eyes. The same cascade of dark hair. The newspaper story was brief, a small column on a local page. Local woman in tragic accident, it mentioned. She had been a friend of the family, a close friend. She had been staying with them. It was her parents' first house, the one from the christening photo. The report was sterile, devoid of emotion. It stated that Clara had gone for a walk late one night near the river that ran behind their old property and had slipped on the muddy bank. A tragic misstep in the dark, a lie. Isla felt it in her bones, a cold, deep certainty that resonated with the fear she'd seen in her parents' eyes. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was the secret. Clara was the ghost. The antagonist, she realized with a fresh wave of nausea, was not some stranger, some external threat. It was the woman in the silver dress who had tucked her into bed at night, the woman who had planned her wedding with terrifying precision. Her mother, Eleanor. The photo of Clara was from a summer barbecue, years before Isla was born. Eleanor was in the photo too, her arms slung casually around Clara's shoulders. They were both smiling, but even then, Isla could see it. The slight tension in Eleanor's jaw, the proprietary nature of her grip. It wasn't the embrace of a friend. It was the grip of an owner. And the hidden witness. That was the most sickening revelation of all. In the box, beneath Clara's death certificate, was a small leather-bound diary. The handwriting was neat, looping, and feminine. Clara's diary. Isla's hands shook so violently she could barely turn the brittle pages. The early entries were filled with hope. She wrote of moving in with Richard and Eleanor, her best friends, to help them get the new house ready for their baby. For Isla, Eleanor is so lucky. One entry read. Richard adores her. He looks at her like she's the only person in the world, and soon they'll have their little girl. Sometimes I press my hand against Elle's belly, and I can almost feel her. I can't wait to be Auntie Clara. The words were a punch to the gut. This woman, this ghost, had loved her before she was even born. She had been a part of the joy, a part of the beginning. So what happened? Isla kept reading, her heart pounding against her ribs. The tone of the diary began to shift. The hopeful, looping script grew tighter, more frantic. Elle has been strange lately, so moody. She snaps at me for the smallest things. Yesterday, I folded the baby clothes wrong, and she threw them at me. She said I was useless. Later, she cried and apologized, said it was the hormones, but her eyes. They were so cold. Another entry, a week later, Richard tries to keep the peace. He's always been the gentle one. He told me to be patient with her. But I see the way he looks at me, sometimes, when Elle isn't in the room. A sad look, a sorry look. What is he sorry for? The broken pasts were laid bare on the page. Eleanor, the ambitious, beautiful daughter of a wealthy but emotionally barren family, obsessed with perfection and control. Richard, the quiet, kind man from a humbler background, perpetually in awe of his dazzling, difficult wife, and willing to do anything to keep her happy. And Clara, the orphan, the dependent friend, the one with nowhere else to go, caught between them. A perfect storm of secrets and resentments brewing under one roof. Isla felt like a voyeur, a grave robber of emotions. She was reading the last will and testament of a dead woman's heart. The diary entries grew more sporadic, more fearful. Clara wrote of Eleanor's escalating jealousy, her paranoid accusations. She accused Clara of trying to steal her husband. She accused her of wanting to steal her baby. She locked me in my room today for 2 hours. She said it was a joke, but I heard her turn the key. Richard was at work. I was terrified. When he came home, she was all smiles, and he told me I was being dramatic. Am I going crazy? Is this what friendship is supposed to feel like? The hidden witness wasn't just Clara. In a way, it was her father. The silent observer, the peacekeeper who kept the peace by ignoring the war. He was the enabler, the one who looked away, who told the victim she was being dramatic, while the abuser sharpened her knives. His weakness, his desperate need to maintain the placid surface of his marriage, had been Clara's cage. Isla closed the diary, her fingers numb. The house was silent, but her head was screaming. The photograph wasn't just a moment in time, it was a tableau of a tragedy. Her christening, a day of supposed celebration, had been a focal point of this simmering horror. Clara, shut out, perhaps literally locked out, pressing her face to the glass. Watching the family she had dreamed of being a part of crystallize without her. The happy family portrait father, mother, child was a lie she had been forced to witness. And her parents, the architects of this lie, were asleep upstairs in the bed they had shared for 35 years. She walked out of the study and back into the grand hall of the manor. The champagne-colored light was gone, replaced by the cold blue glow of the moon. The flowers were already starting to wilt, their sweet scent now tinged with decay. Her wedding cake stood in the shadows, a pale, looming ghost. She picked up the silver-framed photograph from the table. She stared at it, no longer seeing a happy family, but a cast of characters in a horror story. The victim, looking in from the cold. The antagonist, smiling with teeth. The silent witness, beaming with a joy he didn't deserve. And the baby. The prize, the justification. She had been the reason for all of it. Her arrival had been the catalyst for the jealousy, the paranoia, the cruelty. Clara hadn't been a threat to the marriage. She had been a threat to Eleanor's absolute ownership of the narrative of motherhood, of family. Clara's love for the unborn Illa had been seen not as a gift, but as a claim. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Her mother was awake. Illa's blood ran cold. She stood frozen in the center of the room, clutching the photograph to the bodice of her ruined wedding dress. The confrontation she had been steeling herself for was here. The 30-year-old silence was about to break, and Isla knew, with a certainty that eclipsed all other thoughts, that the story of Clara's accidental drowning was the first of many lies she was about to unravel. She looked up towards the grand staircase, waiting for the antagonist to make her entrance. The fortress had been breached. The ghost was out, and the trial was about to begin. The house wasn't just a house, it was a tomb, and her parents were the gatekeepers. The cruelty began subtly. A series of calculated emotional paper cuts designed to isolate and destabilize her. The morning after the wedding, Isla confronted her parents in the manor's sun-drenched breakfast room. The remnants of the celebration were gone, cleared away by an invisible, efficient staff. All that remained was the cloying scent of stale champagne and the heavy, unspoken tension. Liam had already left, called away by a work emergency he couldn't ignore, leaving her alone to face them. It felt less like a coincidence and more like a strategic retreat, orchestrated by her mother. Isla placed the creased newspaper clipping of Clara's obituary on the polished mahogany table between the silver coffee pot and a basket of untouched croissants. "I want to talk about her," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I want to know why you lied to me." Eleanor didn't even flinch. She took a delicate sip of her coffee, her little finger extended. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice cool and bored. "We told you. She was a friend. There was an accident. It was a very sad time. End of story." "Her diary doesn't say it was an accident," Isla countered, her voice rising. "It says you were cruel to her. It says you locked her in her room. It says you were terrified she was going to steal your baby." Her father, Richard, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He stared down at his plate, meticulously buttering a piece of toast he had no intention of eating. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was already retreating, disappearing into the wallpaper of his own life. Her diary. Eleanor's laugh was a sharp, ugly sound. "Oh darling, you can't be serious." Clara was unstable, deeply, deeply troubled. "We took her in because she had nowhere else to go. We tried to help her, but she had these fantasies. She was obsessed with Richard, pathologically so. The things she wrote in that diary, they were delusions. The ravings of a very sick mind. The gaslighting was so complete, so audacious. It left Isla breathless. They were twisting the narrative, recasting the victim as the villain. Clara wasn't a prisoner. She was a lunatic. Eleanor wasn't a tormentor. She was a long-suffering saint. So the face in the window at my christening, that was just a delusion, too. Isla pressed, her fists clenched in her lap. She wasn't supposed to be there. Richard mumbled, finally speaking, his voice thick with a 30-year-old guilt. "We had asked her to give us the day, for the family. But she wouldn't listen. She was always intense. She was manipulative," Eleanor cut in, her voice like steel. "And I will not have you, on the first day of your marriage, digging up these painful, sordid memories and flinging them at us as if we were criminals. We were the victims, Isla. She was a disturbed woman who brought tragedy into our home and then ended her own life." "The paper said it was an accident," Isla shot back. "A drowning. You're saying she killed herself." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "The details are fuzzy. It was a long time ago. Does it matter? She's gone. The point is, you need to let this go. You have a new life, a husband, focus on that. This obsession is unhealthy." The injustice was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. They were not just lying, they were desecrating a memory. They were taking Clara's pain and reshaping it into a weapon to use against her. Over the next few days, the conflict escalated with brutal precision. Isla tried to talk to older relatives, aunts and uncles who had been there in the early days. But the calls were met with a rehearsed, uniform story. "Oh, Clara was a sweet girl, but so troubled. Your mother was a saint to put up with her for so long. It was for the best, dear. Some people just aren't meant for this world. Her mother had gotten to them first." The narrative had been set in stone, cemented by decades of quiet, persistent reinforcement. Isla was no longer just questioning a family secret. She was challenging the entire family's shared history, and they were closing ranks against her. Her relationship with Liam began to fray. He had returned from his trip to find his radiant bride replaced by a haunted, obsessive stranger. She tried to explain, showing him the diary, the photo, the newspaper clipping. He listened, his face etched with concern, but he couldn't bridge the gap between the loving, stable in-laws he knew and the monsters Isla was describing. "Honey, I believe that you're seeing this," he said one evening, his voice gentle, trying to be diplomatic. "But you have to admit, it sounds incredible. Your mum has been nothing but amazing to me." To us, maybe she's right. Maybe this Clara woman was unwell, and your parents were just trying to protect you from the ugliness of it all. Was the ultimate betrayal. He wasn't siding with them, not explicitly, but he was planting the seeds of doubt. He was suggesting that her own perception of reality was flawed. The antagonist was winning, not through overt aggression, but through the insidious poison of plausible deniability. Eleanor was using Liam's love for Isla as a tool to paint her as hysterical, as unstable as the woman whose ghost she was chasing. The humiliation came at a family dinner a week after the wedding. A dinner ostensibly held to celebrate the newlyweds. Eleanor, in a breathtaking display of passive-aggressive cruelty, had invited Dr. Jennings, an old family friend, who also happened to be a psychiatrist. The conversation was light and breezy until Eleanor steered it, with the skill of a master mariner, towards the topic of postnuptial depression. "It's so common, isn't it, Mark?" she said, smiling at the doctor while her eyes were fixed on Isla. "All that build-up, all that planning, and then? The quiet, it can play tricks on the mind. A young woman might find herself feeling untethered, even inventing dramas to fill the void." Ela felt the blood rush to her face. The entire table was looking at her, their expressions a mixture of pity and concern. Liam shifted uncomfortably beside her. She was being publicly diagnosed, subtly declared mentally unfit in front of her entire family and her new husband. It was a checkmate move. Anything she said now would be viewed as proof of her instability. To argue would be to confirm the diagnosis. To stay silent would be to accept it. She felt trapped, suffocated by the web of lies her mother had so expertly woven. The witness, her father, just sat there, swirling the wine in his glass, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. He was a coward. His silence was not just weakness, it was an act of violence. He was holding the door open while his wife destroyed their daughter's credibility. The danger became real a few days later. Isla, refusing to give up, decided to visit the old house, the scene of the crime. Her parents had sold it decades ago. She found the address in the box of documents and drove there alone. It was smaller than she remembered, a modest suburban house on a quiet, tree-lined street. The river was still there, a sluggish brown ribbon of water at the edge of the overgrown backyard. She walked the perimeter of the property, her heart pounding. She stood where she imagined Clara must have stood, peering into the window at the christening party. The air was thick and humid. As she approached the riverbank, her foot slipped on a patch of slick, wet mud. She pinwheeled her arms, catching her balance just before she would have tumbled into the dark water. The echo of the official story slipped on the muddy bank was terrifyingly real. As she straightened up, her heart racing, she saw him, a man standing on the opposite side of the small river, partially obscured by the weeping willows. He was watching her. There was nothing overtly threatening about him, but his stillness was unnerving. When he saw that she had noticed him, he didn't look away. He just stood there, his expression unreadable, before turning and walking slowly away, disappearing into the trees. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her frustration. Had he been following her? Was it a coincidence? Or had her mother, growing bolder, sent someone to watch her? To intimidate her? The message was clear. Stop digging. You are not safe. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay beside Liam, pretending to be at peace, while her mind replayed the scene at the river. The silent man in the trees. The antagonist was no longer just manipulating her emotionally. She was encroaching on her physical safety. The injustice had escalated from a buried secret to an active threat. Isla was no longer just a daughter seeking the truth. She was a witness who knew too much, and the people she was investigating were the people who were supposed to protect her. She clutched the small, leather-bound diary in the dark, its pages a fragile shield against a danger that felt more real and more terrifying than ever. The struggle between fear and conscience was over. Fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. She had to find proof, something undeniable, something that could cut through the web of lies and expose the truth of what happened to Clara Mayhew. Her life, she now realized, might literally depend on it. The plot twist didn't come from a dusty attic or a forgotten safe deposit box. It came from the cloud. Liam, in a well-intentioned but ultimately catastrophic attempt to be a good husband, had decided to digitize all of their old family media for a surprise anniversary gift. He had gathered up her parents' collection of clunky VHS tapes and 8mm film reels, Christmases, birthdays, family vacations, and sent them to a service that converted them to digital files. He'd proudly presented her with a sleek, silver hard drive. "Our whole lives all in one place," he'd said, smiling. Completely unaware he was handing her a loaded gun, Ilya had spent days combing through the files. A grim archaeological dig through her own manufactured happiness. It was all there, the forced smiles, the stilted interactions, her mother's ever-present watchful gaze. She saw her childhood, not as she remembered it, but as it was, a performance piece. With her as the star, and her parents as the anxious directors, Clara was nowhere to be seen, a ghost exorcised from the official record. The clue was buried in the most innocuous of places, a 5-minute video labeled Isla's First Steps, 1995. The quality was grainy, the sound distorted. It showed a chubby, determined toddler hurling across the living room of the old house. Her father was behind the camera, his voice a low, encouraging murmur. "Come on, sweetheart, you can do it. Come to daddy." Isla watched, a dull ache in her chest. It was a sweet, normal home movie. But she let it play to the end. After she had successfully navigated the vast expanse of shag carpet and tumbled into a pile of cushions, Richard didn't immediately turn the camera off. He left it running, resting it on a coffee table, the lens pointing vaguely at the corner of the room. For a full unedited minute, the camera recorded an empty armchair and a side table with a telephone on it. The sound was muffled, but present. It was the sound of her father making a phone call. Her heart stopped. She grabbed her headphones, plugging them into her laptop and turning the volume up to maximum. The audio was a wall of hiss and crackle, but underneath it, she could hear her father's voice, hushed and frantic. He was talking to someone, his tone completely different from the gentle "come to daddy" of a moment before. This was the voice of a man in a panic, double quotes, don't know what to do, Richard was saying, his words clipped. "She's completely lost it. She's talking about the river again. No, I can't. She hear me." There was a pause. Illa leaned closer to the screen, her own breathing stopped. She could hear the faint, tinny squawk of the person on the other end of the line, but couldn't make out the words. Then, her father's voice returned, laced with a despair so profound it felt like a physical blow across the decades. "She found the letter," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Clara's letter, the one she left for the baby, for Isla. Eleanor found it. She's burning it. She's burning everything. Oh God, what is she doing?" Isla ripped the headphones off, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. A letter. Clara had left a letter for her. A final message, and her mother had found it and destroyed it. This wasn't just covering up a suicide or an accident. This was the active, malicious destruction of evidence. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came seconds later. Through the hiss of the tape, another sound emerged. A voice, from the background of the room, sharp and cold and utterly unmistakable. It was Eleanor. She wasn't shouting, she was speaking in a low, controlled tone. That was more terrifying than any scream. "Richard," she said, her voice cutting through the static like a shard of glass. "Get off the phone, now. Elle, please, we have to talk about this," he pleaded. "There is nothing to talk about," she said. And then came the words that changed everything. The words that exposed the entire conspiracy. "The doctor is on his way, he knows what to do. He'll bring the boat. We'll take her out on the river, give her the medication. It will look like she fell, just like we planned." The world dissolved into a roar of static. Isla fell back in her chair, her hands flying to her mouth. It wasn't a cover-up of a death, it was a confession to a murder. Planned, premeditated. The doctor is on his way. Dr. Jennings, the psychiatrist, the family friend who had sat at her dinner table and pathologized her grief. He wasn't just a friend, he was an accomplice. They hadn't just watched Clara drown. They hadn't just driven her to suicide. They had staged it. They had drugged her, taken her out on the river in a boat, and pushed her in. The full monstrous scope of it was laid bare in a forgotten home movie. Her father wasn't just a silent witness, he was a co-conspirator. His phone call wasn't a cry for help. It was a moment of weakness, a brief, failed rebellion before he fell back in line. The stakes had shifted with dizzying speed. This was no longer about personal pain or a family secret. This was about a cold-blooded murder, a 30-year conspiracy, and a respected doctor who had helped cover it up. The private grief had become a public crime. The shadow in the photograph at her wedding wasn't just a ghost. It was the victim of a homicide. And the killers had been smiling at her from across the room. Her mind raced, connecting the dots with horrifying clarity. The man watching her at the river, he wasn't just a warning. He was likely there to ensure she didn't find something, some piece of evidence they might have missed. Perhaps he was a private investigator hired by Jennings, the fixer. Her mother's icy composure, her father's pathetic weakness. Dr. Jennings's clinical assessment of her instability, it was all part of the cover-up, an elaborate performance designed to protect them. She felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful it made her dizzy. The fear was still there, a cold not in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a white-hot righteous rage. They hadn't just killed Clara. They had erased her. They had stolen her voice, her story, her final words to the baby she had loved, and they had tried to do the same to Isla. Using psychological warfare to make her doubt her own sanity, she copied the audio file onto a separate flash drive. Her movements sharp and precise. She looked at the hard drive Liam had given her. This accidental bomb. Her own life, the one she had lived for 30 years, was a lie built on the bedrock of this crime. Her name, her home, her inheritance, it was all fruit from a poisoned tree. The tension was unbearable, a physical pressure in her skull. She couldn't go to Liam, not yet. He was a good man, but he was a civilian in a war he didn't understand. This was beyond him. She couldn't go to the police, not with a grainy audio recording and the word of a hysterical daughter against a respected doctor and a wealthy, powerful family. They would bury her in litigation and character assassination. No, public justice required a public stage. It required an explosion so loud it couldn't be ignored. She looked at her phone, at the calendar. Her parents were hosting their annual charity gala in 2 days. A huge, lavish affair at a downtown hotel, attended by the city's elite. The mayor would be there. The chief of police. The media, Dr. Jennings, was always an honored guest. It was their kingdom, their stage. The ultimate symbol of their untouchable status. And it was going to be their gallows. She had the weapon. The grainy audio file was her truth bomb. Now she needed to build the detonator. A plan began to form. In her mind, a plan so audacious, so theatrical, that it felt like something her mother would orchestrate. She was going to use their own tactics against them. Their love of spectacle, their obsession with public image. She was going to take their perfectly curated world and burn it to the ground in front of everyone they had ever wanted to impress. The cinematic payoff had to be as shocking and as public as the crime had been secret and private. She wasn't just going to expose them. She was going to give Clara the audience she had been denied for 30 years. The ballroom of the Grand Excelsior Hotel was a cathedral of manufactured prestige. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears, casting a cold, brilliant light. Over the city's most influential people, men in tuxedos and women in jewel-toned gowns, drifted through the cavernous space, their laughter echoing off the marble columns. It was a world of power, of whispered deals and air kisses, the natural habitat of Eleanor and Richard Davenport. Tonight, they were the king and queen of it, presiding over their annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. Their magnanimity, the talk of the town. Ela stood in the shadows of a service corridor, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She was not on the guest list. She wore a simple black dress, the antithesis of the glittering peacocks in the ballroom. In her hand, she clutched a small, powerful wireless microphone, its signal synced to the house PA system. Her other hand held her phone, on which a single audio file was queued up. Liam was at home, thinking she was at a spa, a lie that tasted like ash in her mouth but was a necessary casualty of the war she was about to win. The plan was simple, brutal, and theatrical. She had bribed a disgruntled audiovisual technician, a young man her mother had berated into tears during the setup, access to the sound for $1,000 and the promise of a spectacular show. He had given her a 5-minute window during her father's keynote address. She watched on a small monitor as her father took the stage to a round of polite, enthusiastic applause. He looked distinguished, confident, the very picture of civic virtue. He smoothed down his tuxedo, cleared his throat, and began to speak, his voice resonating with a practiced, folksy charm. He talked about community, about legacy, about the importance of protecting the innocent. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost sublime. Eleanor sat at the head table, stage left, radiating pride. Beside her, Dr. Mark Jennings, looking silver-haired and benevolent, a pillar of the medical community. They were untouchable. They were gods in their own small universe. Illa took a deep breath. "This is for you, Clara. Her father was just reaching the emotional crescendo of his speech. "And so, when we look into the eyes of a child," he said, his voice thick with faux emotion, "we see the future. We see hope. We see the sacred trust that is placed in our hands." Ila pressed the button. The connection was instantaneous. Her father's microphone cut out. A collective gasp, a ripple of confusion, went through the ballroom. Heads turned, technicians scrambled. And then, a new sound filled the vast space. A sound that did not belong. The hiss and crackle of an old VHS tape. And then, her father's voice, younger, frantic, terrified, filled the room, amplified to a deafening volume. Double quotes. Don, single quotes, to know what to do. She's completely lost it. She's talking about the river again. Illa saw her father freeze at the podium, his face draining of all color. He looked wildly around, his eyes wide with a dawning animal terror. At the head table, a serene smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief. Dr. Jennings's hand, which had been lifting a glass of water to his lips, stopped mid-air. The audio continued, relentless. She found the letter. Clara's letter. The one she left for the baby. For Isla. Eleanor found it. She's burning it. She's burning everything. Oh God, what is she doing? A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. People were turning to each other, their faces a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity. They knew this was not part of the show. Then came Eleanor's voice, cold and clear as the diamonds at her throat. "Richard, get off the phone now." Illa stepped out of the shadows. She walked calmly, deliberately, towards the stage. The microphone held firmly in her hand. All eyes were on her now. The unexpected daughter. The ghost at the feast. "There is nothing to talk about," Eleanor's recorded voice echoed through the ballroom. And then the final damning words. "The doctor is on his way. He knows what to do. He'll bring the boat. We'll take her out on the river, give her the medication. It will look like she fell, just like we planned." Absolute, stunned silence. The air crackled with it. The city's elite, the mayor, the chief of police, all sat frozen, their faces slack with shock. The recording ended, leaving only a faint electronic hiss that sounded like the exhalation of a long-held secret. Isla was at the foot of the stage now. She looked up at her father, who seemed to have aged 30 years in 30 seconds. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She then turned her gaze to her mother. Eleanor was on her feet, her face a kabuki mask of fury and horror. But for the first time, Isla saw her not as a monster, but as a cornered, pathetic thing. Isla raised the live microphone to her lips. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was calm, clear, and carried to every corner of the silent, cavernous room. "My name is Isla Davenport," she began. And for 30 years I have been living a lie. The woman you just heard them talking about was Clara Mayhew. She was my mother's best friend, and they murdered her. She let the words hang in the air. She didn't need to embellish. The recording had done the work. She was just providing the epilogue. They drugged her. They drowned her in a river behind our house. And they did it with the help of the man sitting right there. She pointed directly at Dr. Jennings. They did it because Clara left a letter for me, her unborn goddaughter. A letter my mother didn't want me to read. They killed her to protect a secret, and they have spent every day since building a fortress of lies and money and influence to keep that secret buried. She saw the flash of camera phones now, dozens of them, a new constellation of digital witnesses. The media table at the back was a frenzy of activity. This was no longer a family drama. This was a public execution. The shadow in my christening photo, she continued, her voice gaining strength, it was Clara. Locked out of the house, watching the family that was stolen from her. She wasn't a delusion. She was a victim. And this, she swept her arm around the opulent ballroom. This life, this reputation, this charity. It is all built on her grave. Security was moving towards her now, but it was too late. The police chief was already on his feet, his face grim, speaking urgently into his radio. 2 uniformed officers were making their way towards the head table. Eleanor finally broke. "Lies!" she shrieked, her voice cracking, the carefully constructed facade shattering into a million pieces. "She's hysterical, unstable. This is a fabrication, a sick, twisted fantasy." But no one was listening to her. They were all looking at Richard. Her father, the silent partner, the weak-willed accomplice, stood at the podium, weeping. Not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity. He was not a monster. He was just a coward, and in the end, that was worse. He made a choking sound, and then, in front of hundreds of people, he collapsed, sliding down the side of the podium and onto the floor in a heap of shame and cardiac arrest. The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, screaming. Paramedics were called, as her father was being attended to. The police officers reached the head table. They spoke quietly to a stunned Dr. Jennings, and then to Eleanor, whose face had gone from rage to a terrifying vacant calm. The public justice Isla had envisioned was happening. It was messy, it was ugly, and it was breathtakingly complete. Isla dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a loud thud that echoed through the bedlam. Her work was done. She turned and walked away from the stage, away from the wreckage of her family. No one stopped her. She moved through the parting crowd like a ghost herself, her purpose fulfilled. As she reached the exit, she looked back one last time. She saw her mother, her beautiful, powerful, cruel mother, being gently but firmly escorted away by 2 detectives. Her reign was over. The fortress had fallen. It wasn't just revenge. It was a restoration. She had given Clara her voice back, and it had been loud enough to bring down a kingdom. The emotional aftermath was not a tidal wave of healing, but a long, slow, quiet reign. There was no triumphant reunion, no cathartic embrace. There was only the silence left behind by the explosion. The gala became an infamous piece of city law. The Davenport implosion. The story was a media supernova for weeks, a lurid tale of high society, murder, and betrayal. Dr. Jennings, facing irrefutable evidence and public ruin, confessed everything in exchange for a plea deal. He detailed the entire conspiracy, Eleanor's escalating, paranoid jealousy, the plan to silence Clara, who she feared would expose her instability to Richard and try to take the baby, the acquisition of the drugs, the staged drowning. His confession painted Eleanor as the remorseless architect and Richard as the terrified, spineless accomplice who went along with it out of a pathetic fear of losing his wife and the life she provided. Her father didn't survive his heart attack. He died on the floor of the ballroom, a final, pathetic act of escape. There was a small, private funeral that Isla did not attend. She couldn't mourn the man who had chosen a comfortable lie over an innocent woman's life, and over his own daughter's truth. His death was just the final closing of a ledger that had been in the red for 30 years. Eleanor's trial was swift. Stripped of her power, her wealth frozen, her allies scattered, she was just a venomous aging woman in a drab prison jumpsuit. She never showed a flicker of remorse. She maintained her narrative to the end. Clara was a deranged stalker. Isla was an ungrateful, hysterical child, and she was the true victim. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Isla watched the verdict on a small television in the sterile temporary apartment she had rented, a place with no memories. When the judge read the sentence, she didn't feel joy or victory. She just felt quiet. The roaring fire of her rage had burned itself out, leaving behind only a landscape of cold, grey ash. Her marriage to Liam did not survive. The chasm that had opened between them was too wide to bridge. He couldn't look at her without seeing the destruction she had wrought. He had married a princess from a fairy tale and woken up next to a revolutionary who had burned the kingdom. Down he loved the woman she was, but he was terrified of the woman she had become. The divorce was amicable, a quiet, sad acknowledgement that their love story had been a casualty of a war that began before they were even born. 6 months after the trial, Isla finally received a small water-damaged box from the police evidence locker. It contained the few possessions of Clara's that had been recovered. Among them, tucked into the lining of a worn wallet, was a single folded piece of paper, miraculously preserved. It was a page, torn from her diary. It was the letter, the one Eleanor had thought she'd burned. Clara must have hidden a copy. Hands trembled as she unfolded the brittle page. The handwriting was the same looping script from the diary, but it was shaky, hurried. It was dated the day before she died. My dearest little one, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it means your mother has been an even poorer friend to me than I imagined. I need you to know that my leaving was not my choice. There is a darkness in this house, a coldness in your mother's heart, that I don't think your father is strong enough to fight. I fear she will do anything to make sure she is the only one you ever love. But I loved you first. I felt you kick. Sang you songs through her belly. I wanted to be your protector, your confidant, your Auntie Clara who would spoil you rotten and tell you embarrassing stories about your parents. I wanted to watch you grow. I will not get that chance. Do not let them poison you with their secrets. Do not let her make you small so she can feel big. Your life is your own. Be brave, be true. Know that you are loved, fiercely and completely. From the very beginning, forever yours. Clara. Tears streamed down Isla's face, hot and cleansing. They were the first tears she had shed since her wedding day. They were not tears of anger or grief, but of connection. This letter was her true birthright. Not the money, not the name, but this final, desperate act of love from a woman she had never met. The healing began there, with those words. It was not a return to who she was, but the slow, painful construction of someone new. She sold her parents' house and all its contents, the blood money from their life of lies. She donated every penny to a national charity for victims of domestic abuse, endowing a new wing in Clara Mayhew's name. One crisp autumn afternoon, she drove out to a small, quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city. It had taken her weeks to find it. There was no grand tombstone, just a small, flat, unmarked plaque in a neglected corner of the grounds. The state had buried Clara here 30 years ago. An anonymous end to a stolen life. Isla knelt and placed a single perfect white rose on the cool stone. She had brought a new grave marker with her. It was simple, elegant granite. It read, Clara Mayhew, beloved. She was loved fiercely. She stayed there for a long time. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass, the air was still, the world was quiet. The mystery was solved, the dead were avenged, the guilty were punished. But the cost had been everything. She had lost her past, her present, and the future she had so carefully planned. But in the wreckage, she had found a terrible, beautiful truth. And she had found the woman who had loved her first. The lingering emotional echo was not one of haunting, but of a quiet, profound, and bittersweet peace. The shadow was finally at rest. And for the first time in her life, so was Isla.